Thursday afternoon, Melbourne University. Things are getting hot on Australian campuses, where rival groups of students are demonstrating about the war in the Middle East. So far, it hasn't reached the levels of violence and drama we're now seeing on American uni campuses, as reported by NBC.
Tonight, police crackdowns continue on college campuses across the country.
In the US, university leaders say the protests are being dominated by professional demonstrators, not students.
Columbia University says it had no choice but to call the police.
The police are making their way onto the campus. Dozens of officers.
Overnight, more than 100 were arrested on campus.
Most of the attention is being grabbed by pro-Palestine and pro-Gaza protesters, featuring sing-alongs, teach-ins and children chanting slogans, as you might have heard in Monday's edition of The Front.
Intifada! 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 From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free.
At Sydney Uni, tents are daubed with that slogan, from the river to the sea, which means from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. That is, the area presently occupied by Israel and two small slices of land, the West Bank of the Jordan River, ruled by the Palestinian Authority, and Gaza, ruled by Hamas. On Thursday, it was Jewish students staging their own demonstrations, waving giant Israeli flags and chanting slogans of their own. Here's the scene at Melbourne Uni, captured by our journalist Prisia Rivera. The two groups, with Israeli flags on one side and Palestinian on the other, faced off across an ornamental pond, with police standing by. Tensions have been bubbling for a week, with Queensland Uni's Jewish students accusing the Palestinian protest on campus of displaying a flag of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. That's been designated a terror organisation by the US, Canada and parts of Europe. In Australia, it's on a list of organisations subject to financial sanctions. Organisers of the UQ protest said the appearance of the flag among other pro-Palestinian placards was a distraction from the central issue, what they say is a genocide of Palestinians in Gaza. This is not just happening at unis. Natasha Beder is the Australian's education editor. She was on the streets of Brisbane on Thursday, going between interviews, when she came across a protest march. Natasha followed the march and began introducing herself as a journalist to some of the students. Here's one she spoke to. This student is wearing a keffiyeh, a traditional Palestinian scarf, draped over a t-shirt that says, "Move beyond coal."
I'm a 17-year-old grade 12 student here in Megunjin, and I'm striking for Palestine because there is genocide, children are dying, people my age are dying, and yeah, I will not be complicit in the genocide, and I will put that over my education any day.
Natasha asks a question.
Okay, and what do you feel about the innocent people in Israel as well who were killed?
Sorry, what is this? Are you with these people?
No, I'm a journalist, so I'm just asking you because there are also people being killed in Israel.
No comment.
No comment? Okay.
Natasha got the same response when she started speaking to one of the organisers, who identified himself as Will Asim.
Happy that you had school children here, or do you feel they should have been at school today? Or
Well, I think if, high schoolers want to, be part of the movement for Palestine, that's a great thing. I think high schoolers actually a lot of the time are, attacked by the right-wing media, and told that, they're not allowed to, they should just focus on their studies. Well, I think that's ridiculous. They're people as well, and they care about fighting against injustice, and so they're welcome at our rallies.
Yeah. Did you also condemn what? Did you also? Yeah, my name is Natasha Beta. B-I-T-A. Yeah. Do you also condemn what Hamas did?
I think those questions are actually just distractions from the real genocide that's happening in Gaza right now. I don't know.
I introduced myself as a journalist, told them my name. I didn't ask for their surnames, I just asked for their first name, no other details, and started interviewing. And very quickly had some of the adult supporters sort of circle me and get very irate and hostile with me and screaming at me that I should be a disgrace for interviewing minors and how dare I be asking for their phone numbers, etc., which I wasn't doing. I tried to explain to them that you're holding a public protest. What do you think is going to happen? Like, this is a public place. You're parading children in a public place. I am merely asking why they chose to come here, which is quite a standard thing. But I was found it quite confronting, the hostility I was met with, because I was purely just trying to understand. It clearly to me is not a pacifist protest. It's not an anti-war. This is a let's wipe Israel off the planet protest.
At the Australian National University in Canberra, one student organiser of a pro-Palestine encampment outraged Jewish groups by declaring Hamas deserves our unconditional support. Here's that student, Beatrice Tucker, on ABC Radio.
Not because I agree with their strategy, complete disagreements with that. But the situation at hand is, if you have no hope, if you are sanctioned every day of your life, if you're told you're not allowed to drive down a road because somebody who is Israeli gets to have preference and you sit there for 12 hours, the reality of life in Palestine...
that can't justify what they did in October last year.
Nothing can justify what has been happening to the Palestinian people for 75 years, right?
The ANU Student Association condemned the statements. Our colleague Noah Yim reported the Australasian Union of Jewish Students ACT co-president Meir Klein said Jewish students at ANU were feeling intimidated, isolated and misunderstood, and that the encampment was morphing into something quite frightening.
This is what I find very interesting in the education sector at the moment, the intolerance. I think that traditionally university students have always protested. That's what young people do. They protest against the status quo. But what I'm finding about these protests is they're quite intimidating. And if you were a Jewish person, you would find them incredibly spine-chilling.
Coming up, student protests are one thing, but what about the role of academics? The Australian has the best coverage of the tertiary sector and of the war in the Middle East, as well as all the nation's best journalism. Join us by subscribing at theaustralian.com.au, and we'll be back after this break. There's an academic called Randa Abdel Fattah who works at Macquarie University. She's vocally pro-Palestine. She's questioned whether the rapes of young Israeli women on October 7 really happened, and she was part of the children's event at Sydney Uni, where the kids were chanting Intifada. The federal opposition is demanding Abdel Fattah lose a taxpayer-funded Australian Research Council grant worth more than $830,000 over 4 years. But Abdel Fattah says her critics are white supremacists, targeting her because she's a Muslim female academic. Here's Natasha Beta.
It should be no surprise that Dr. Abdel Fattah is active in this area. She is an activist and she's very pro-Palestinian. So this has always been her viewpoint. The key issue is that on October 8, the day after Hamas terrorists parachuted into Israel and massacred hundreds of innocent civilians and young people at a concert, the very day after that, she changed her Facebook profile photo to that of a parachutist in Palestinian flag colours. Now, this is incredibly provocative, and many Jewish people would find it a very threatening thing to do. The other issue is that she effectively is using young children as props for her protests. She said herself when she was addressing the protest at the University of Sydney, "Oh, my own kids were complaining, saying, why do we have to come here?" Now, I just don't think that children who ought to be at school should be dragged along to protests which they may not comprehend, which can very quickly become very dangerous or confronting or violent because they want something to put on their social media feeds. That's not appropriate.
On Thursday, the University Chancellor's Council plenary meeting considered a request from a group called the Australian Academic Alliance Against Anti-Semitism. The Chancellors declined to directly condemn anti-Semitism and instead said freedom of expression was a foundational principle of university governance and hate speech directed at any person was completely unacceptable. It's vice-chancellors who really run universities. So, how are they handling it?
I think Australian universities have been very fortunate that they haven't had to deal with the violence of the protests in the United States. At the University of Queensland, there are two rival protest groups. There are the pro-Palestinian and the pro-Israeli group who've set up camp, and they've got security guards keeping them apart. I think at the University of Sydney, the Vice-Chancellor, Mark Scott, has dealt with it in a very logical way where he's not banned protests, because we shouldn't be banning free speech and we shouldn't be banning debate. But he said, look, there are certain standards and codes of conduct you have to abide by. However, I think there are some limits that you need to put to ensure that people are kept safe and feel safe and it is kept respectful. And so he has read the Riot Act and said he's investigating some violations to the Code of Conduct, which includes protesters entering buildings and harassing staff, graffiti on walls, a truck driver making an unauthorised delivery to the encampment and allegedly spitting at staff, and protesters blocking a road. So I think it's a very fragile time, and it's very difficult to support free speech and the right to protest with the need for respect and safety.
Natasha Beta is the Australian's education editor. Thanks for joining us on The Front this week. Our team is Kristen Amiot, Leah Tsamaglu, Josh Burton, Tiffany Dimmack, Jasper Leake, Matthew Condon and me, Claire Harvey.